A Berlin flat, capital city, 3.7 million people, Europe's tech hub, costs less per square meter than a Cardiff flat. Not London, Cardiff. That is not a typo, and it did not happen by accident. This is not about Germany being cheap or Berlin being rough. Berlin has world-class infrastructure, a booming tech sector, and more residents than Wales. The gap is entirely about policy. Here are the three things you leave with: the mechanism behind the gap, the specific decisions that made UK rents uncontrollable, and the political dynamic that means it is not going to fix itself. Stay till the end. The third one changes how you think about all of this. The gap is measurable. According to Eurostat Housing Statistics 2022, UK renters rank among the most cost-burdened in Western Europe, spending a sharply higher share of household income on rent than most comparable economies. German renters sit near the opposite end of that same data set. Both are wealthy countries with functioning cities and strong economies. One has a mechanism to keep rents in check, the other simply does not.
Berlin is the proof of concept. This is not a sleepy, low-demand city. De Statis, the German Federal Statistical Office, recorded Berlin absorbing more than 300,000 new residents between 2011 and 2019 alone. Demand went up sharply. Rents went up too, but they went up inside a framework that slowed and capped them. That framework is the whole story, and it starts with one number that explains everything about German politics. Germany has been building tenant protections since the 1970s. The Mietspiegel, a publicly published rent index for every major city, was anchored in BGP tenancy law reforms in the mid-1970s. In 2015, the federal government layered the Mietpreisbremse on top. That is the rent brake. It limits what landlords can charge new tenants in high-demand areas relative to a local reference rent that is updated and published every 2 years. The system was not improvised. It was built and then defended across multiple governments. Here is the political engine behind all of it. According to Eurostat Housing Statistics 2022, roughly 49% of Germans own their home. That is one of the lowest home ownership rates in Western Europe. The UK sits at about 65%, Spain at 75%. When the majority of your voters are renters, politicians who attack tenant protections lose elections. Germany is a country where most voters rent. That single fact reshapes the entire political economy of housing.
That is point one. When the majority rents, you get rent protection. When the majority owns, you get house price protection. The UK locked in its choice in 1980. But here is what most people get wrong about Germany. They think it is just a rent cap. It's actually 4 interlocking mechanisms. Pull out any one of them and the system weakens. But here is what most people get wrong. They hear rent control and picture a simple price cap. Germany has something more structural. The Mietspiegel gives every city a public benchmark. Landlords must justify rent against it. The Mietpreisbremse caps new tenancy rents at no more than 10% above that benchmark in regulated areas, per the 2015 federal law. Leases default to indefinite duration. Eviction rules are strict and narrowly defined. And critically, renting is not treated as a failure state. In Germany, renting is just what most people do. Now watch what the UK did to its own housing stock. According to data from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, social housing as a share of total homes in England fell from roughly 31% in 1981 to around 17% by the early 2020s. That is not a market trend. That is the direct, documented consequence of one specific policy: right to buy. Right to buy launched in 1980, letting council tenants buy their homes at a discount. According to MHCLG data, over 2 million council homes were sold in England by 2023. Germany did not do this at scale. Social housing, Sozialwohnungen, stayed a substantial public stock. Here is the logic problem the UK created. You cannot build tenant protection frameworks on top of a housing supply you have already sold off. The UK tried to run the German destination without the German starting point. The right to buy story has a second chapter nobody mentions. Those council homes did not disappear. A significant share ended up in the private rented sector, where there is no Mietspiegel, no rent brake, and no public benchmark. The UK sold off regulated housing, and a large portion of it quietly became unregulated housing. According to the English Housing Survey 2022-23, published by MHCLG, the private rented sector now houses around 19% of English households. In 1988, it was closer to 9%. That growth did not come from nowhere. Here is what England's housing tenure looks like today. According to the English Housing Survey 2022-23 from MHCLG, around 64% of households own their home, 19% are in the private rented sector, and 17% are in social housing. In 1981, social housing was nearly double that share. The private rented sector has expanded to fill the gap, with no equivalent of the Mietspiegel, no rent break, and no public number telling a landlord what is actually fair. That is point 2. The UK did not just skip Germany's tenant protections, it actively dismantled the housing stock those protections would apply to, and handed a large portion of it to private landlords operating with no legal ceiling on what they can charge. Now point 3, the one that reframes everything you have just heard. The third mechanism is supply, and this is the part that changes how you read every UK housing announcement. Germany's Baugesetzbuch, the National Building Code, sets frameworks that local authorities must follow. Municipalities have substantially less power to veto density and development than UK councils do. According to Statis, Germany completed around 295,000 new homes in 2022. England managed approximately 232,000 per MHCLG housing supply statistics for the same year. Germany has fewer people than the UK. They still built more homes. That gap is also a policy choice, not a planning accident. Pull it together. Germany, a public rent index, a rent break tied to it, indefinite leases by default, strict eviction rules, a social housing stock they kept, and a build rate that keeps pace with demand. UK, no national rent index, fixed-term tenancies that reset to market rate at turnover, a social housing stock cut nearly in half since 1981, and a planning system that local objectors can stall. One of these produces Berlin prices, the other produces Cardiff prices. Both are choices. And that is the bit nobody in the housing debate wants to say out loud. The Berlin-Cardiff gap is not geography, it is not luck or culture or some quirk of history, it is 40 years of decisions about who to protect and whose wealth to grow. The UK built a system where rising house prices feel like prosperity. Germany built a system where stable rents feel like normal. The uncomfortable part, the bit that changes how you read every housing headline from here on, is that both of those are working exactly as designed. If this clicked, the video on rent control, what the evidence actually says about whether it works, goes into the next layer of this. And if you want more of this every week, subscribe.